Number 1. Rick James. He wasn't just a musician. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of glitter, funk, and raw, untamed energy who exploded onto the scene, grabbed pop music by the throat, and forced it to dance to his electrifying beat. He was the self-proclaimed king of punk funk, the creator of anthems like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby, a charismatic, flamboyant superstar who lived life at 1,000 miles per hour. But behind the jerry curls, the sparkling bodysuits, and the chart-topping hits, lurked a darkness fueled by an insatiable hunger, not just for fame, but for the devastating grip of crack cocaine. This addiction would transform the musical genius into a monster, leading him down a path of paranoia, violence, and imprisonment that would shock the world and forever tarnish the legacy of Rick James. Born James Ambrose Johnson Jr. in 1948, Rick James's life was always intertwined with music and rebellion. He went AWOL from the Navy Reserves, fled to Canada, and formed a band with future legends Neil Young and Joni Mitchell. He worked behind the scenes at Motown before finally bursting into the spotlight in the late 1970s with his unique blend of funk, rock, and soul. Albums like Come Get It and Street Songs were massive successes, turning him into one of the biggest stars of the era. He was known for his incredible musical talent, his outrageous stage presence, and his notoriously wild lifestyle. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll weren't just lyrics for him. They were a daily reality. Cocaine, in particular, became his constant companion, fueling his creativity, but also igniting a dangerous paranoia and volatility. By the late 80s, his addiction escalated, shifting from powdered cocaine to the cheaper, more intense, and far more destructive crack cocaine. This shift marked the beginning of his terrifying descent. How far would the darkness take him? As his addiction deepened, his behavior became increasingly erratic and violent. The musical genius who crafted infectious grooves was being consumed by a paranoid, aggressive alter ego. The breaking point, the incident that would land him behind bars and define the darkest chapter of his life, occurred in July 1991. James and his young girlfriend, Tanya Hijazi, were holed up in his West Hollywood home, deep in a multi-day crack cocaine binge. Convinced that a 24-year-old woman named Frances Alley had stolen drugs or money from him, James lured her back to his house. What followed was not an argument, but hours of sadistic torture. According to court testimony, James and Hijazi held Alley captive for several days. They beat her viciously. They burned her repeatedly with the hot end of a crack pipe and a heated knife, causing severe third-degree burns. They forced her to perform degrading sexual acts. Alley eventually managed to escape, battered and traumatized, and went straight to the police, detailing the horrors she had endured. But had James, now facing serious charges, learned his lesson? Incredibly, just weeks later, while out on bail for the first assault, James and Hijazi struck again. This time the victim was Mary Sauger, a music executive James had invited to his hotel room, ostensibly to discuss business. When Sauger refused James's advances, or perhaps simply found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time during another drug binge, the rage erupted once more. James and Hijazi held Sauger captive for nearly 20 hours. She was subjected to a terrifying ordeal of beatings and sexual humiliation before she managed to escape and alert authorities. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. Rick James, completely consumed by his crack cocaine addiction, had become a predator, using extreme violence and terror to exert absolute control over his victims. The super freak had become a super monster, his actions far removed from the playful energy of his music. The subsequent legal proceedings were a media sensation. The graphic testimony of Frances Alley and Mary Sauger painted a horrifying picture of drug-addled sadism and unchecked violence. James initially denied the charges, perhaps believing his fame could shield him. But the evidence, including the severe physical injuries inflicted on the victims, was overwhelming. Facing the possibility of life in prison for kidnapping and torture, he eventually accepted a plea deal. In 1993, Rick James was convicted of assault and false imprisonment. Tanya Hijazi was also convicted for her role in the attacks. James was sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in California's notorious Folsom State Prison. The King of Funk, the Grammy winner, the multi-platinum superstar, was now just another inmate, stripped of his fame and freedom, paying the price for the violence his addiction had unleashed. He served just over 2 years before being released on parole in 1996. Prison seemed to have had a sobering effect, at least temporarily. He spoke publicly about his addiction, expressing remorse for his actions and attempting a musical comeback. He even enjoyed a brief resurgence in popularity thanks to sampling by artists like MC Hammer and a memorable, self-parodying appearance on Chappelle's show, where his famous line, "Cocaine is a hell of a drug," became an ironic, ubiquitous catchphrase. But the demons of addiction never fully left him. He continued to struggle with substance abuse and numerous health problems for the remainder of his life, facing minor legal issues even after his release. Rick James died in his sleep in August 2004 from pulmonary and cardiac failure, with a coroner's report finding 9 different drugs, including cocaine, in his system. His story is a tragic cautionary tale of immense talent consumed by addiction. He reached the pinnacle of pop stardom, creating music that defined an era, only to have his legacy irrevocably stained by the brutal crimes committed under the influence of crack cocaine. Crimes that led him from the stage, straight into a prison cell. While James's violence was fueled by crack, our next star's downfall was a slower, more public descent, driven by heroin and the relentless glare of the British tabloids. Number 2. Boy George. In the vibrant, synthesized landscape of 1980s pop music, few figures were as instantly iconic, as visually arresting, or as universally beloved as Boy George. With his androgynous style, soulful voice, and penchant for flamboyant hats, he led Culture Club to the absolute pinnacle of global superstardom. Songs like "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me" and "Karma Chameleon" weren't just hits. They were cultural touchstones, defining the look and sound of the new romantic era. He was the gender-bending, boundary-pushing darling of MTV, celebrated for his wit, his charm, and his seemingly harmless eccentricity. But beneath the colorful makeup and the infectious melodies, a devastating secret was taking hold. A crippling addiction to heroin that would derail his career, shatter his public image, and eventually lead him down a dark path involving violence, captivity, and ultimately, prison. Born George Allen O'Dowd in 1961, Boy George emerged from the vibrant London club scene of the late 70s and early 80s. His unique look, a blend of masculine and feminine, incorporating dreadlocks, ribbons, and elaborate makeup, made him an instant standout. When Culture Club formed, their blend of pop, soul, and reggae, fronted by George's smooth, soulful vocals, was irresistible. Their debut album exploded worldwide in 1982. For the next few years, they were arguably the biggest band on the planet. George was everywhere: magazine covers, talk shows, his face a constant presence on MTV. He was witty, articulate, and seemed to handle the intense pressures of fame with grace, famously quipping, "I'd rather have a cup of tea than sex," cultivating an image that was flamboyant yet somehow non-threatening. But the pressures were immense, and George sought refuge in the deadliest of escapes. How long could he maintain the facade? By the mid-1980s, rumors of Boy George's heroin addiction began to surface. His behavior became increasingly erratic. He missed interviews, canceled performances, and his once radiant appearance began to show the strains of drug abuse. The band started to fracture, partly due to the volatile, secret romantic relationship between George and drummer John Moss. In 1986, the facade finally cracked. George's younger brother went public, pleading with the media to expose George's heroin addiction in a desperate attempt to force him into treatment. The story became a tabloid sensation. Shortly after, police raided George's London home and arrested him for heroin possession. Around the same time, Michael Rudetsky, a keyboardist who had co-written a song with George, was found dead of a heroin overdose in George's home. While George was not directly implicated in Rudetsky's death, The incident further fueled the media frenzy. Culture Club disbanded, and Boy George, once the darling of pop, became a cautionary tale. He spent the following years battling his addiction, entering rehab multiple times and attempting a solo career with varying success. He remained a public figure, often celebrated for his resilience. He found success as a DJ and even launched a successful musical, Taboo, based on his life. It seemed, for a time, that he had overcome his darkest demons. He was clean, creative, and seemingly stable. But the shadows of addiction are long, and in the mid-2000s, George's life took another dark, violent, and unexpected turn, leading to the crime that would ultimately send him to prison. What could possibly have happened to drag him back down? In April 2007, Audun Carlson, a Norwegian male model and escort, called the police claiming he had been assaulted and held captive by Boy George in his London flat. Carlson alleged that after a consensual photo shoot, he was lured back on a second occasion. This time, Carlson claimed, George and another man accused him of tampering with George's computer, handcuffed him to a wall fixture, and subjected him to a terrifying ordeal where George allegedly threatened him and beat him with a metal chain. Carlson eventually managed to wrench the fixture from the wall and escape into the street, partially clothed and terrified, where he alerted the police. When officers arrived, they found the handcuffs still attached to the wall. Boy George was arrested. The case went to trial in late 2008. George vehemently denied the charges, claiming Carlson was trying to extort him and had indeed tried to steal photos. His defense argued the handcuffing was part of a consensual encounter gone wrong. However, Carlson's testimony was compelling, and the physical evidence supported his claim of being held against his will. Prosecutors highlighted George's history of drug abuse, suggesting cocaine use might have fueled paranoid delusions leading to the attack. The jury had to decide, was this a consensual act misrepresented, or a violent assault fueled by paranoia and control? In January 2009, the jury delivered its verdict. Boy George was found guilty of assault and false imprisonment. The judge, sentencing him to 15 months in prison, condemned the violence and humiliation inflicted on Carlson. The image of Boy George, the flamboyant pop icon, being led away to serve time in Pentonville prison, was a shocking fall from grace. He served 4 months before being released early for good behavior, subject to strict curfew and electronic monitoring. Since his release, Boy George has largely rebuilt his life and career. He has participated in Culture Club reunions, appeared as a coach on talent shows, and continued his successful DJ career. He remains an outspoken and often beloved public figure. However, his prison sentence stands as a stark reminder of the dark period where addiction and paranoia led him to commit an act of violence utterly at odds with the gentle, soulful persona that first captivated the world. He wasn't jailed for simple drug possession, but for the violent consequences his long-term substance abuse ultimately unleashed, a pattern of addiction leading to incarceration seen in another British pop star whose struggles played out even more dramatically in the public eye. Number 3. George Michael. He was the epitome of cool sophistication. With his smoldering good looks, effortlessly smooth voice, and perfectly crafted pop anthems, George Michael defined superstardom for a generation. From the exuberant energy of Wham! To the global phenomenon of his solo album Faith, he sold over 100 million records, won countless awards, and cultivated an image of meticulous control and artistic integrity. He was private, often elusive, but always projected an aura of suave confidence. Yet behind the designer stubble and the timeless melodies, George Michael was wrestling with profound personal demons, grief, depression, and a growing dependence on drugs that would lead to a series of increasingly public and dangerous incidents, culminating in a shocking car crash that landed the pop icon behind bars. Born Georgios Kyriakos Panayotou in 1963, George Michael burst onto the scene as one half of the wildly popular duo Wham! Hits like Wake Me Up Before You Go Go made them global teen idols. But Michael's ambition soared higher. In 1987, he released his solo debut, Faith. It was a cultural earthquake, selling over 25 million copies and establishing him as a serious artist and a global sex symbol. He navigated fame with apparent ease, carefully controlling his image and fiercely guarding his privacy, particularly regarding his sexuality. He seemed untouchable, a master craftsman at the peak of his powers. But personal tragedies were about to send his carefully controlled world into a spiral. What darkness lay beneath the pop perfection? The 1990s brought immense professional success, but also devastating personal loss. In 1993, his first great love, Anselmo Felipe, died tragically from an AIDS-related brain hemorrhage. Just a few years later, his beloved mother succumbed to cancer. Michael later described this period as one of profound depression and grief. It was during this time that his drug use, primarily cannabis, but also reportedly prescription medications and later harder substances, began to escalate significantly. He used drugs, he admitted, to cope with the pain and escape the pressures of fame. His first major public stumble came in 1998, when he was arrested for engaging in a lewd act in a public restroom in Beverly Hills, forcing him to publicly come out as gay. While embarrassing, it didn't involve drugs, but the incidents that followed would place his substance use squarely in the public eye. Over the next decade, George Michael's driving became a recurring, dangerous theme, hinting at deeper issues. In 2006, he was found slumped over the wheel of his Mercedes in London, blocking an intersection. He pleaded guilty to driving while unfit through drugs, cannabis and prescription medication, and was banned from driving. Just months later, despite the ban, he was found semi-conscious in his car again, leading to community service. In 2008, he was arrested in a public toilet for possession of crack cocaine and cannabis, though charges were later dropped. Then, in 2009, he crashed his Land Rover into a truck. It seemed like a pattern of near misses, fueled by his ongoing drug use. Friends expressed concern. Tabloids ran lurid headlines, but the superstar seemed unable to stop his self-destructive behavior. The world watched, waiting for the inevitable catastrophe, and it arrived in the dead of night in July 2010. In the early hours of July 4, 2010, residents in Hampstead, North London were awoken by a loud crash. George Michael, driving his Range Rover erratically after attending a gay pride parade, had lost control and plowed directly into the front of a Snappy Snaps photo processing shop, shattering the storefront. Police arrived to find him dazed, slumped at the wheel. He was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence. Blood tests later confirmed he had cannabis in his system and had taken prescription anxiety medication. This was not just another minor incident. It was a serious, potentially fatal crash in a residential area. The image of the pop icon's luxury car embedded in a high-street shop became a stark symbol of his fall. How would the courts react this time? When George Michael appeared in court in September 2010, he pleaded guilty to driving under the influence of drugs and possession of cannabis. His lawyers argued for leniency, citing his charity work and personal struggles. But the judge was stern, referencing Michael's previous driving offenses and the inherent danger of his actions. The judge stated that his addiction and fame offered no protection. "It does not appear that you took proper steps to deal with what is clearly an addiction," the judge said. To the shock of many, George Michael was sentenced to 8 weeks in prison. He was also fined and given a 5-year driving ban. The sophisticated superstar was going to jail. He served 4 weeks of his sentence at High Point Prison before being released. The experience, he later said, was horrible, but acknowledged his culpability. Following his release, he attempted to address his issues, entering rehab and speaking more openly about his battles with addiction and depression. He continued to perform sporadically, but his health remained fragile. On Christmas Day 2016, George Michael died suddenly at his home at the age of 53 from heart and liver disease, conditions likely exacerbated by his years of substance abuse. His prison sentence for the drug-related driving offense stands as a poignant low point in a career defined by incredible highs. He wasn't jailed for dealing, but for the dangerous consequences of his personal drug use, a cycle tragically familiar to our next star, whose bad boy reputation was cemented by numerous drug-fueled arrests and jail stints. Number 4. Bobby Brown, he was the original bad boy of R&B, the electrifying performer who strutted out of the wholesome teen group New Edition and exploded onto the solo scene with an irresistible swagger. With chart-dominating hits like My Prerogative and Don't Be Cruel, Bobby Brown defined the sound and style of New Jack Swing, blending R&B smoothness with hip-hop energy. His marriage to pop royalty Whitney Houston created a superstar couple whose every move was scrutinized by the world. But beneath the kufi hats, the Gumby haircut, and the undeniable stage presence, Brown was battling fierce demons. A relentless addiction to alcohol and cocaine fueled a life of chaotic behavior, domestic turmoil, and a seemingly endless string of arrests that repeatedly landed him in jail, ultimately eclipsing his immense musical talent. Born in 1969, Bobby Brown tasted fame at a young age as a founding member of New Edition, but his rebellious nature clashed with the group's clean-cut image, leading to his departure in 1985. His solo career took off spectacularly with the 1988 album Don't Be Cruel. It was a multi-platinum monster, establishing him as a global superstar. He was young, rich, famous, and oozing charisma. His marriage to Whitney Houston in 1992 seemed like a fairy tale. But the fairy tale soon devolved into a notoriously volatile and public drama, heavily fueled by both partners' escalating substance abuse. Cocaine, crack, and alcohol became central figures in their turbulent lives, and Brown's bad boy image started bleeding into his real life with alarming frequency. How long could he maintain his stardom amidst the growing chaos? Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Bobby Brown's name became a fixture not just on the music charts, but on police blotters. His arrests became almost routine, painting a picture of a man spiraling out of control. The charges were varied but often linked to his substance abuse. Drunk driving, DUI, drug possession, cocaine and marijuana, battery, often related to domestic disputes, including incidents involving Whitney Houston, and numerous probation violations. He seemed caught in a revolving door of arrests, court appearances, rehab stints, and brief jail sentences. Each incident chipped away at his career and his public image. The electrifying performer was being overshadowed by the chaotic addict. Would he ever break the cycle? His struggles with drunk driving were particularly persistent. Multiple DUI arrests across different states became a recurring theme. In 1996, he faced battery charges after a nightclub fight. In 2000, he spent time in jail related to an old warrant. In 2003, he was sentenced to jail time in Georgia for violating probation related to a previous DUI. He was arrested again later that year for battery against Whitney Houston. The pattern was relentless: an arrest, a court date, often a short jail sentence or probation, followed inevitably by another violation or a new offense. His inability to comply with court orders or stay sober consistently meant that minor offenses often ballooned into more significant jail time due to probation violations. His addiction issues were intrinsically linked to his legal troubles. Cocaine possession charges surfaced repeatedly. He openly admitted to heavy drug use during his marriage to Houston, describing a codependent relationship where substance abuse was rampant. While Whitney Houston's tragic death in 2012 brought renewed scrutiny to their shared history of addiction, Brown's own legal problems continued. He faced more DUI arrests in 2012, leading to another stint in rehab mandated by the court. Each arrest, each mugshot, further cemented his public image, not as a musical innovator, but as a troubled addict unable to escape his demons or the consequences of his actions. Unlike some stars whose drug use led to a single, catastrophic crime resulting in a long sentence, Bobby Brown's prison time was more akin to a series of disruptive, recurring episodes. He served numerous short sentences, days or weeks at a time, often in county jails, primarily for probation violations stemming from his inability to stay sober or meet court requirements related to his DUI and drug possession charges. While no single sentence was exceptionally long, the cumulative effect was devastating. These repeated incarcerations disrupted attempts at career comebacks, strained his relationships, and reinforced the public perception of him as unreliable and out of control. His talent was undeniable, but his addictions and the resulting legal consequences constantly held him back. Bobby Brown has spoken more openly in recent years about his struggles, his sobriety efforts, and the profound grief following the tragic deaths of both Whitney Houston and their daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, who also battled addiction. He has acknowledged the immense toll drugs took on his life, his career, and his family. His journey is a stark illustration of how addiction can lead to a relentless cycle of self-destruction and incarceration, even for someone blessed with extraordinary talent. He wasn't jailed for being a drug kingpin, but his personal consumption and the chaotic behavior it fueled kept him entangled with the justice system for decades. A cycle tragically familiar to our next star, whose poetic lyrics couldn't save him from the grip of heroin and the British tabloids. Number 5. Pete Doherty. In the early 2000s, British rock and roll found its new poet laureate of chaos. With his skinny ties, trilby hats, romantic lyrics, and an air of Byronic self-destruction, Pete Doherty, frontman of the Libertines and later Baby Shambles, became an icon. He was the epitome of cool Britannia indie rock. Talented, charismatic, effortlessly cool, and seemingly destined for greatness. The music press adored him, fans worshipped him, and the tabloids chronicled his every move with obsessive glee. But Doherty wasn't just flirting with the rock and roll lifestyle. He was consumed by it. His immense talent became inextricably linked with a severe, public, and relentless addiction to heroin and crack cocaine, an addiction that transformed him from a rock star into a walking headline, leading to a dizzying carousel of arrests, rehab attempts, and repeated stints in prison. Born in 1979, Peter Doherty's rise was meteoric. He formed the Libertines with Carl Barat in the late 90s, and their raw energy, poetic lyrics, and volatile chemistry quickly captured the imagination of the UK music scene. Their debut album, Up the Bracket, was hailed as a masterpiece. Doherty was lauded as a generational talent, a sensitive songwriter wrapped in a punk rock package. He cultivated an image of romantic decay, drawing inspiration from poets, and living a life that seemed to mirror their troubled genius. But the romance quickly soured as Doherty's drug use spiraled out of control. Heroin and crack cocaine became his constant companions, fueling his creativity, but also destroying his relationships and his reliability. His addiction became the central drama of the Libertines, leading to canceled gigs, infighting, and eventually, his first major brush with the law involving his own bandmate. Could the band survive his descent? In 2003, while the Libertines were touring Japan without him, due to his unreliability, a desperate and drug-addled Doherty broke into Carl Barat's apartment and stole guitars and other valuables, presumably to pawn for drug money. He was arrested, pleaded guilty to burglary, and was sentenced to 6 months in prison. This act of betrayal against his closest collaborator stunned the music world and led to the first implosion of the Libertines. He served about 2 months before being released, briefly reuniting with Barat, but the underlying addiction remained untreated. This prison sentence wasn't for simple possession. It was for a serious crime committed directly as a result of his desperate need to fund his habit. Would this first taste of prison be enough to scare him straight? Far from it. After the final collapse of the Libertines, Doherty formed a new band, Baby Shambles. While the music continued to earn critical praise, his life became an even more public spectacle of addiction and chaos. The British tabloids became obsessed with him, particularly during his tumultuous, high-profile relationship with supermodel Kate Moss. Every arrest, every court appearance, every rumored overdose was splashed across the front pages. Doherty became less known for his music and more known as a caricature of the drug-addled rock star. His rap sheet grew exponentially. Arrests for possession of heroin, crack cocaine, cannabis, and ketamine became almost routine. Driving offenses piled up. Driving without a license, without insurance, often while under the influence. He seemed caught in a perpetual loop. Score drugs, get arrested, go to court, get fined or given probation, violate probation, get arrested again. His court appearances became bizarre media events. He would show up late, looking disheveled, sometimes even bringing drugs into the courthouse. Judges grew increasingly frustrated, handing out fines, community service orders, driving bans, and mandatory rehab stints. Doherty would attend rehab, sometimes checking out after only a few days, relapse almost immediately, and the cycle would begin anew. He seemed utterly incapable of breaking free from the grip of his addiction, despite the escalating legal consequences. In 2008, he served 29 days of a 14-week sentence for breaching probation related to previous drug and driving offenses. Prison seemed to offer only a temporary enforced sobriety before he returned to his old habits. Would any sentence be long enough to make a difference? His addiction didn't just lead to possession charges, it fueled other criminal behavior. Besides the burglary of Barat's flat, he faced accusations of robbery and blackmail in separate incidents, though some charges were dropped. The constant chaos surrounding him also had tragic consequences for others. Several people in his orbit died from overdoses or drug-related incidents, including filmmaker Robin Whitehead, who was documenting Doherty's life at the time of her death from a heroin overdose in 2010. While not legally responsible, the deaths highlighted the dangerous world his addiction had created. His most significant prison sentence, related purely to drug possession, came in 2011. After police found cocaine on him following an investigation into Whitehead's death, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 months in jail. Pete Doherty's story is a stark illustration of how addiction can utterly consume even the brightest talents. His music spoke of romance, rebellion, and a certain kind of English melancholy, but his life became a relentless public struggle against heroin and crack. He served multiple short prison sentences, primarily for drug possession, burglary committed to fund his habit, and probation violations stemming from his inability to stay clean or comply with court orders. Unlike some stars whose crimes were singular, violent events, Doherty's journey through the justice system was a long, slow-motion car crash, a series of repeated offenses driven by the insatiable demands of addiction. He has reportedly achieved periods of sobriety in recent years, moving away from the chaotic London scene. But his legacy remains complex. A brilliant songwriter whose potential was constantly undermined by his demons. A man whose trips to prison became almost as frequent as his trips to the stage. While Doherty's prison time stemmed from his all-consuming personal habit, our next star's Incarceration followed a bizarre, drug-fueled police chase involving firearms, a shocking public meltdown for the hardest-working man in show business. Number 6. James Brown. He was more than just a singer. He was an institution, the godfather of soul. The hardest-working man in show business? Soul brother number 1. James Brown was a musical titan, an electrifying performer whose raw energy, innovative rhythms, and legendary stage presence transformed American music. From funk and soul to hip-hop, his influence is immeasurable. He was a symbol of black pride, a self-made icon who preached discipline and self-respect. But behind the incredible talent, the dazzling footwork, and the tightly controlled public image, James Brown battled demons, a volatile temper, a history of domestic turmoil, and, particularly in his later years, a destructive addiction to PCP, angel dust, and cocaine. This addiction would lead to one of the most bizarre and shocking public meltdowns in music history, culminating in a high-speed, 2-state police chase and a prison sentence that stunned the world. Born in extreme poverty in rural South Carolina in 1933, James Brown's early life was marked by hardship. Music became his escape. He rose through the ranks, first with the famous Flames and then as a solo artist, scoring hit after hit. Papa's got a brand new bag. I got you, I feel good. Say it loud, I'm black, and I'm proud. His live performances were legendary. He demanded absolute perfection, ruling his musical empire with an iron fist. He was a complex figure, a champion of civil rights, a shrewd businessman, but also known for his controlling nature and explosive temper. While rumors of drug use circulated for years, It was in the 1980s that his substance abuse, particularly PCP, seemed to spiral, leading to increasingly erratic behavior. What finally pushed the Godfather over the edge? The breaking point occurred in September 1988. It began, bizarrely, at an insurance seminar next to his office complex in Augusta, Georgia. Brown, reportedly high on PCP and angered that someone had used his private restroom, burst into the seminar brandishing a shotgun and a handgun. He ordered everyone out, ranting incoherently. Police were called, but before they arrived, Brown sped off in his pickup truck. What followed was a surreal, hour-long high-speed chase that crossed state lines from Georgia into South Carolina and back again. Police cars pursued the legendary singer as he swerved recklessly, driving over curbs and ramming police vehicles. He was finally cornered back in Augusta after police shot out his tires. He emerged from the truck, defiant but clearly intoxicated. The hardest-working man in show business was under arrest. But why the guns and the desperate flight? Brown later claimed the incident stemmed from threats against his life, and that he feared for his safety. But his drug use was undeniable. He was charged with multiple felonies, including aggravated assault on police officers, carrying weapons, and drug offenses. PCP was found in his system. His trial was a media spectacle. James Brown, the icon, was facing serious prison time. His defense argued his actions were the result of drug-induced paranoia. Prosecutors painted him as a dangerous, out-of-control figure. In December 1988, James Brown was found guilty on several counts, including aggravated assault and failing to stop for police. He was sentenced to 6 years in a South Carolina state prison. The image of James Brown being led away in handcuffs was shocking. He served time initially at the State Park Correctional Center before moving to a work-release program. Prison reportedly had a profound impact. He participated in counseling programs. After serving just under 3 years, James Brown was paroled in February 1991. He immediately attempted a comeback, eager to reclaim his place. While he never quite reached his earlier fame, James Brown continued to tour relentlessly until his death on Christmas Day, 2006. His 1988 arrest and prison sentence remain a jarring chapter in his incredible life. It was a moment where his legendary control finally snapped, shattered by the destructive power of PCP addiction. He wasn't jailed for building a drug empire, but for the violent, paranoid actions his personal drug use unleashed during that infamous chase. While Brown's drug-fueled meltdown was a shocking public spectacle, our next star's battle with addiction was a quieter, more insidious presence that haunted his entire career, leading to repeated arrests and stints behind bars for heroin. Number 7. Scott Weiland, the 1990s grunge and alternative rock explosion, produced many iconic frontmen, voices that defined the angst and alienation of a generation. Few, however, possessed the mesmerizing serpentine charisma of Scott Weiland. As the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots and later Velvet Revolver, he commanded stages with a slithering grace and a voice that could shift from a guttural roar to a seductive croon. He was the quintessential rock star, enigmatic, stylish, and blessed with undeniable talent. But his entire career, from its dizzying heights to its tragic end, was relentlessly shadowed by a crippling, decades-long addiction to heroin. This addiction didn't just fuel his dark lyrics. It led to a constant, revolving door of arrests, rehab attempts, and jail sentences that repeatedly sabotaged his bands and ultimately contributed to his premature death. Born Scott Richard Klein in 1967, Weiland co-founded Stone Temple Pilots, STP, in the late 1980s. Their debut album, Core, released in 1992, was a massive multi-platinum success, powered by hits like Plush and Creep. Their follow-up album, Purple, debuted at number 1, cementing STP as one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Weiland seemed to have it all, but even as the band conquered the charts, Weiland was falling deep into the grip of heroin addiction. His drug use quickly became inseparable from his rock star persona, and just as quickly, it began to attract the attention of law enforcement. How long could he keep his demons hidden? Weiland's first major drug-related arrest came in 1995. He was caught buying crack cocaine, but the underlying issue was heroin. He was convicted of felony heroin possession and sentenced to probation, contingent on completing rehab. This arrest marked the beginning of a relentless pattern. Get arrested, go to rehab, often court-ordered, get clean for a period, relapse, get arrested again. His addiction became constant turmoil for Stone Temple Pilots. Tours were canceled. Recording sessions were disrupted. The band's immense potential was perpetually undermined by their frontman's inability to stay sober. Would this first brush with the law be a wake-up call? The cycle continued through the late 90s. More arrests for heroin possession followed. Probation violations became almost routine. In 1999, after violating probation yet again, Weiland faced his first significant stint behind bars. He was sentenced to 1 year in Los Angeles County Jail. This was a substantial sentence intended as a harsh intervention. He served several months in a specialized drug treatment unit within the jail before being released early to a residential rehab facility. During this period, STP was forced into hiatus. Upon his release, Weiland seemed determined. He rejoined STP, releasing the album Number 4. But sobriety remained elusive. By 2001, he faced legal trouble again for domestic battery. Stone Temple Pilots, exhausted by the endless cycle, finally disbanded in 2003. It seemed like Weiland's career might be over, but rock and roll offered him another chance, forming the supergroup Velvet Revolver with former members of Guns N' Roses. The band was an instant success, topping the charts. Weiland seemed revitalized, but the pressures proved too much. Old habits resurfaced. In 2007, he was arrested for driving under the influence of drugs. His increasingly erratic behavior and relapses led to friction, mirroring the problems that had destroyed STP. In 2008, Velvet Revolver announced they were parting ways with Scott Weiland. History was repeating itself. The rest of Weiland's career followed a depressingly familiar pattern. He briefly reunited with STP, only for them to fire him again in 2013. He continued with solo projects, but his performances became inconsistent, clearly affected by his substance abuse. More arrests followed, including another DUI and drug possession charges. While these later arrests didn't result in long prison sentences, they continued the cycle. He served short jail stints for probation violations. The cumulative effect was a career constantly interrupted, potential squandered. Scott Weiland died on December 3, 2015, found unresponsive on his tour bus from an accidental overdose of cocaine, ethanol, and MDA. He was 48. His story is one of rock's great tragedies, a supremely talented vocalist consumed by heroin addiction. His multiple arrests and stints in jail weren't for violent crimes, but for the possession and influence of the drugs that ultimately killed him. A constant, sad counterpoint to the music that brought joy to millions. While Weiland's addiction led to repeated short jail stays, our next star's drug use fueled a long, complex, and violent history culminating in significant prison time. Number 8. DMX. Some artists capture the zeitgeist through polished pop perfection. Others connect through raw, unfiltered primal energy. Earl Simmons, the man the world knew as DMX, was the latter. He didn't just rap. He barked, he growled, he prayed, he wept, pouring his tormented soul onto tracks with an intensity that was both terrifying and captivating. He exploded onto the late 90s hip-hop scene like a force of nature, achieving unprecedented chart success with 5 consecutive #1 albums. His music was dark, aggressive, and deeply spiritual, reflecting a life marked by extreme hardship and inner conflict. But the same demons that fueled his art, a traumatic childhood, paranoia, and a devastating, lifelong addiction to crack cocaine, also led him down a path of relentless self-destruction, resulting in an almost unbelievable cycle of arrests, probation violations, and lengthy prison sentences that repeatedly silenced one of rap's most distinctive voices. Born in 1970, Earl Simmons endured a childhood in Yonkers, New York, that was a landscape of poverty, abuse, and neglect. He suffered from severe bronchial asthma, He was reportedly tricked into smoking crack cocaine laced in a marijuana cigarette by an older mentor at the age of 14, an event he claimed ignited a lifelong addiction. He spent his teenage years in and out of group homes and juvenile detention centers, finding solace and expression through hip-hop. His talent was undeniable. After years honing his skills, DMX signed with Def Jam Recordings and unleashed his debut album, It's Dark and Hell is Hot, in 1998. It was a critical and commercial monster, debuting at #1, a feat he would repeat with his next 4 albums. An unprecedented run. Hits like Rough Riders Anthem, Party Up, Up in Here, and X Gon Give It to Ya became anthems, showcasing his unique blend of hardcore aggression and surprising vulnerability. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a phenomenon. But the fame and fortune couldn't keep his personal demons at bay, and the law soon came calling. Almost immediately after achieving superstardom, DMX's legal troubles began, creating a parallel narrative to his musical success. His rap sheet became astonishingly long, a dizzying chronicle of arrests spanning decades and multiple states. The charges were incredibly varied, but many stemmed directly or indirectly from his severe crack cocaine addiction and the erratic, often paranoid behavior it fueled. Drug possession charges were a constant. He was arrested numerous times for possession of cocaine, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia. These arrests often led to probation sentences, which he routinely violated, triggering warrants and subsequent jail time. His addiction also fueled reckless driving. He faced multiple charges for driving under the influence, driving with a suspended license, and reckless endangerment, sometimes leading to bizarre incidents like crashing through airport gates or impersonating an FBI agent. The instability caused by his addiction seemed to make compliance with any legal restrictions impossible. How many times could he escape serious consequences? His volatile behavior also led to more serious charges. He faced multiple accusations of animal cruelty, stemming from horrific conditions found at his properties, where neglected pit bulls were discovered. He was arrested for theft, criminal mischief, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest on numerous occasions. He faced weapons charges. Each arrest generated lurid headlines, further damaging his public image and disrupting his career. Tours were canceled. Movie roles dried up. His musical output became sporadic. While his raw talent remained undeniable, his unreliability and constant legal entanglements made him a risky proposition. Unlike some stars whose prison time was a singular event, DMX's experience was a chronic condition, a seemingly endless cycle of brief freedom followed by inevitable re-incarceration. When would the hammer finally fall hard? His prison sentences gradually escalated from short stints in county jail for probation violations to more significant time in state and federal facilities. One of his longer stretches began in 2008, when he faced multiple serious charges in Arizona, including drug possession, theft, and animal cruelty. After barricading himself in his home during a SWAT raid, he eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to serve time in state prison. He was released, only to be arrested again shortly after for violating probation by using drugs. This pattern repeated itself relentlessly. In 2010, he was sentenced to another year in prison for probation violations in Arizona. In 2015, he served several months in New York for failing to pay child support. His most significant federal sentence came later, stemming not just from drugs, but from the financial chaos his lifestyle created. In 2017, DMX was charged with federal tax fraud, accused of evading $1.7 million in taxes over several years through a complex scheme involving cash payments and hiding income. Prosecutors argued this financial crime was directly fueled by his need to fund a lavish, drug-centric lifestyle. Facing significant federal time, he pleaded guilty. During his sentencing hearing in 2018, the judge, acknowledging the immense trauma and hardship Simmons had endured throughout his life, even played DMX's powerful autobiographical song Slippin in the courtroom. DMX himself wept, speaking about his struggles and his desire to be a better father. Despite the empathy shown, the crime was serious. He was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison, Even this federal sentence wasn't the end. After his release in 2019, he quickly violated his parole conditions by testing positive for cocaine and was ordered back into rehab. The cycle seemed tragically unbreakable. DMX spoke openly, both in his music and in interviews, about his addiction as a lifelong battle, a demon he wrestled with daily. He described crack cocaine not as a party drug, but as a tormentor that offered brief escapes followed by deeper despair. His raw honesty about his struggles resonated deeply with many fans who saw past the headlines to the tortured soul beneath. DMX died on April 9, 2021, at the age of 50, after suffering a catastrophic heart attack triggered by a cocaine overdose. His death prompted a massive outpouring of grief. His life story is one of the most tragic in modern music. He possessed a singular voice, achieved phenomenal success against incredible odds, but could never fully escape the addiction ignited in his childhood. His numerous prison sentences, stemming primarily from drug possession, probation violations, tax fraud linked to his lifestyle, and the chaotic behavior fueled by his addiction, stand as a testament to the devastating lifelong consequences of crack cocaine. While DMX's addiction led to a chaotic cycle of crime, our next star's heroin habit fueled a quieter, yet equally destructive pattern of arrests and incarceration that constantly undermined his rock and roll dream. Number 9. Ike Turner. He was a pioneer, a visionary, a musical force whose scorching guitar riffs and innovative arrangements laid the very groundwork for rock and roll. Before Elvis, before Little Richard, there was Ike Turner, leading his Kings of Rhythm and arguably recording the first true rock and roll song, Rocket 88, back in 1951. His partnership with Tina Turner created one of the most electrifying duos in music history, a whirlwind of raw R&B energy and soulful passion. But Ike Turner's undeniable musical genius was tragically, inextricably linked with a dark, violent, and controlling personality, fueled for decades by a ferocious addiction to crack cocaine. While his abuse of Tina became the defining, horrifying narrative of his later life, it was his own relentless drug use that ultimately led him down a path of paranoia, legal troubles, and a significant prison sentence, marking a grim footnote to a legendary career. Born Izr Luster Turner Jr. in 1931 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, Ike Turner was a musical prodigy. By his late teens, he was a bandleader, arranger, and talent scout, a pivotal figure in the burgeoning Memphis music scene. His discovery of Annie Mae Bullock, whom he renamed Tina Turner and later married, catapulted him back into the national spotlight in the 1960s. The Ike and Tina Turner Revue became a powerhouse act, famed for their explosive live shows and hits like Proud Mary. Ike was the musical mastermind, the demanding band leader, while Tina was the mesmerizing vocal talent out front. But behind the scenes, their relationship was a nightmare. Ike's control manifested as brutal physical and psychological abuse, a pattern Tina would later famously expose. Fueling this violence, particularly as years went on, was Ike's escalating drug addiction. How long could this toxic mix continue? While Ike Turner likely used various substances throughout his career, his descent into the depths of crack cocaine addiction in the late 1970s and 1980s coincided with the implosion of his partnership with Tina and a significant decline in his musical fortunes. After Tina left him in 1976, taking nothing but her name, her solo career slowly began to build, eventually eclipsing his entirely. Ike, meanwhile, seemed lost. His musical output floundered. He became increasingly consumed by his addiction, which reportedly cost him a fortune and fueled his already volatile temper and paranoia. He drifted through the 1980s, a relic of a bygone era, his musical legacy increasingly overshadowed by stories of his abuse and his out-of-control drug use. Arrests began to pile up. How long could the legendary musician evade serious consequences? His rap sheet grew steadily, primarily with drug and weapons charges. He was arrested multiple times for cocaine possession. The drug wasn't just recreational, it was consuming his life. Friends and associates described a man lost in paranoia, prone to violent outbursts, his home reportedly becoming a chaotic den of drug activity. He served short stints in jail for some of these offenses, but the cycle continued. His reputation within the music industry plummeted. While Tina Turner was selling out stadiums, Ike Turner was becoming a cautionary tale. The final decisive legal blow came in 1989. What incident finally brought his freedom to an end? Following yet another arrest for cocaine possession and driving offenses, Ike Turner, now in his late 50s, was facing serious time. His long history of drug arrests and his apparent inability to stay clean worked against him. He was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in a California state prison. This wasn't just a few days in county jail. This was a substantial sentence, a recognition by the courts that his decades-long addiction had made him a habitual offender. The image of the rock and roll pioneer, the man who helped invent the genre, being incarcerated for cocaine was a shocking culmination of his long decline. Ike Turner served approximately 18 months of his 4-year sentence before being released on parole in 1991. Coincidentally, his release occurred just days before Ike and Tina Turner were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ike, having just been released from prison, was unable to attend the ceremony. Prison, however, did seem to offer him a period of enforced sobriety. Upon his release, he claimed to have kicked his cocaine habit. He attempted another musical comeback, releasing albums that garnered some critical acclaim, and even won a Grammy for Best Traditional Blues Album in 2007, shortly before his death. He also published an autobiography, attempting to counter Tina's narrative and reclaim his musical legacy. Though his denials of abuse were widely met with skepticism, Ike Turner died in December 2007 at the age of 76 from a cocaine overdose, a tragic but perhaps inevitable end given his lifelong battle. His story is complex and often disturbing. He was, without question, a musical innovator, but his genius was inextricably linked to his violence and his addiction. While his abuse of Tina Turner remains the most prominent aspect of his legacy, his significant prison sentence in 1989 was a direct result of his own crippling, long-term crack cocaine addiction. It marked the moment when the law finally caught up with a man whose life had spiraled from musical highs to the depths of drug dependency, a dependency that also fueled the bizarre final act of our last pop star, a man whose public persona seemed purely comedic, clock and all. Number 10. Flavor Flav. More than a hype man's clock. In the world of pop culture, some figures become famous not just for their talent, but for their sheer, undeniable personality. They are the larger-than-life characters, the ones whose catchphrases, style, and eccentricities become instantly recognizable. In the late 80s and early 90s, one man, armed with oversized clocks, bizarre sunglasses, and an infectious, "Yeah, boy," had become the unlikely yet unforgettable face of one of music's most revolutionary groups. He was Flavor Flav, the ultimate hype man for the politically charged rap powerhouse Public Enemy. His energy was boundless, his persona comedic gold. But behind the giant clock and the goofy grin lurked a decades-long battle with a devastating addiction, a struggle with crack cocaine that would repeatedly land him not on stage, but behind bars. Born William Jonathan Drayton Jr. in 1959, Flavor Flav's journey to stardom was anything but conventional. He met Chuck D in college, and together they formed the nucleus of Public Enemy, a group that would redefine hip-hop with its dense production and politically radical lyrics. While Chuck D was the group's lyrical heavyweight, Flav was its wild card, its jester. He wasn't the main rapper, but his ad-libs and his visually arresting presence, the ever-present clock symbolizing the urgency of their message, became integral to the group's identity. Hits like "Fight the Power" and "911 is a Joke" were anthems, and Flav was right there, the court jester in the court of revolution. But as Public Enemy's star ascended, Drayton's personal life began to spiral downwards. What demon was hiding behind the playful facade? The demon was crack cocaine. Flav developed a severe addiction that would plague him for decades, derailing his career and repeatedly jeopardizing his freedom. The contrast between Public Enemy's message of discipline and Flav's increasingly erratic behavior became a source of tension. His addiction led to his first serious brush with the law directly related to drugs and violence. In 1991, he pleaded guilty to assaulting his then-girlfriend and served 30 days in jail. Just 2 years later, in 1993, his addiction fueled an even more serious incident. He was charged with attempted murder and weapon possession after allegedly shooting at his neighbor during a dispute. This incident, along with his ongoing drug abuse, led to him being largely estranged from Public Enemy for periods during the 90s. He spent time in and out of rehab, but the grip of addiction proved relentless. His legal troubles continued, creating a rap sheet filled with drug possession charges, domestic violence incidents, and driving offenses. Could he ever escape this cycle? Just when it seemed his music career might be over, Flavor Flav experienced an unlikely, massive resurgence in the 2000s through reality television. Shows like VH1's The Surreal Life, Strange Love, and particularly his own wildly successful dating show, Flavor of Love, introduced him to a whole new generation. He became a pop culture phenomenon all over again, beloved for his bizarre antics and his quest for love. The shows were often criticized, but they undeniably made Flavor Flav a household name once more. He seemed to have found a new way to channel his chaotic energy into entertainment. But had he truly conquered the addiction that had plagued him for so long? Sadly, the reality TV fame couldn't keep his demons at bay. While the cameras rolled, capturing his comedic persona, his struggles with addiction continued off-screen, leading to more arrests and legal problems. He faced charges for driving offenses, including driving with a suspended license. More seriously, domestic violence incidents continued. In 2012, he was arrested in Las Vegas following a domestic dispute involving his fiancée, allegedly threatening her teenage son with a knife. This led to felony charges and eventually a guilty plea for reduced misdemeanor charges, resulting in probation. His rap sheet continued to grow, a stark reminder that the goofy character on screen was still battling serious issues, often linked to his substance abuse. His prison sentences were often relatively short compared to others on this list, frequently stemming from probation violations tied to his inability to stay clean or comply with court orders related to drug, driving, or domestic charges. There wasn't one single multi-year sentence for a major drug trafficking crime, but rather a persistent pattern of shorter incarcerations that disrupted his life and career. For example, failing drug tests while on probation, or failing to appear for court dates related to drug or driving offenses often resulted in warrants and jail time measured in weeks or months rather than years. The cumulative effect, however, was significant, demonstrating a life constantly interrupted by the consequences of addiction. Flavor Flav's story is a complex mix of revolutionary music, comedic genius, reality TV absurdity, and the devastating, decades-long impact of crack cocaine addiction. He wasn't imprisoned for masterminding a drug empire, but his personal drug use repeatedly led him to violence, reckless behavior, and stints behind bars that fractured his relationship with one of hip-hop's most important groups, and constantly threatened to overshadow his undeniable cultural impact. His journey highlights how even seemingly minor drug-related offenses, when repeated constantly due to addiction, can lead to a life frequently interrupted by incarceration, a revolving door powered by the very substance the user can't escape.